Hello YouTube, how's it going? This is the crossover and I'm back with another video. Today I'm going to be breaking down my Western Conference free agency grades. Last video I broke down my Eastern Conference grades, so today we're going to be taking a look at the other conference and I'm going to be grading how they did in free agency. Similar to last video, I'm going to be grading based on a letter scale system. So my A grade is for teams that I thought drastically improved, got much better, knocked it out the ballpark in free agency. B is for teams that got better. Maybe could have taken advantage of a couple more opportunities. Maybe had a hole or two to fill up, but I think they definitely got better through free agency. C tier is for teams that pretty much stayed where they were. Right, didn't get much better, didn't get much worse. Maybe they could have had a couple opportunities to get better. D is slightly worse, following a little bit of C tier, where maybe they could have taken advantage of some more opportunities, but didn't get much better at all. Probably got a little worse in free agency. And then F tier is for teams that I thought definitely got worse in free agency. So without further ado, let's get right into the video.
To start off with, we have the A tier, and the only team that I have in this tier is the Los Angeles Lakers, who walked away from this free agency with a haul of Talen Horton-Tucker, Kendrick Nunn, Trevor Ariza, Carmelo Anthony, Dwight Howard, Wayne Ellington, Malik Monk, and Kent Bazemore. I had to give the Lakers an A. I mean, they needed shooting, and they went out in free agency and they acquired shooters. Kendrick Nunn is a great deal. I think he's a young guard that has still, a good amount of upside, in this league. I think he could come in and start potentially for this team at the 2 spot, come off the bench and run their offense. Trevor Ariza Trevor Ariza is a minimum contract guy at this point in his career for a reason. But still, if the Lakers could tap into whatever he has left, and get some of that 3-and-D ability that he does have or has had in the past, I definitely think he could be a valuable addition to this team. Talen Horton-Tucker at that 3-year, $30 million deal. I'm not the biggest fan of it just because I don't think Talen Horton-Tucker is worth $10 million for 3 years. But he still is a young player with a lot of potential. Especially as a ball handler. He's very shifty, has a lot of different moves. Not much of a shooter, pretty inconsistent. But I expect him at some point in his career to be able to put it all together on that side of the floor and be a serviceable offensive player. So not a bad deal, and I think he is definitely a trade piece for this Lakers team. If they want to acquire another win now type of player, they could definitely add Talen Horton-Tucker, maybe in a second round pick to try and get something done to acquire a ready now veteran. Carmelo Anthony is probably going to slide in and start at the 4 for this team. I really like this signing. Melo still has a lot left in the tank. I'm a big Melo fan. Obviously, I'm a Knicks fan. Grew up with Melo, so I'm not gonna say anything bad about Melo. Even though you could criticize his defensive ability, but he's when has Melo ever really been a positive defender in his career? But he still offers valuable floor spacing. Can take over the offense at times when LeBron or AD is off the floor. Maybe with Westbrook, they could have like a 2-man thing going. And he's a very valuable floor spacer. Shot 40% from behind the arc this past season. So I think the Melo signing was a great signing. Dwight Howard have more backup, big depth. I think it's a much better fit in LA considering when he was with Philly, he had to play with Ben Simmons most of the time, and Ben Simmons and Dwight Howard on the court at the same time is just not a good tandem. But even if he is on the court, in LA with Russell Westbrook, there will be much more shooters around him than there was with him and Ben Simmons, in Philly. So Dwight Howard's more shooting around him. He's in a more comfortable spot. I think he likes LA much more than Philly. LA needed more backup big man depth. So Dwight Howard is a great signing for them. Wayne Ellington gives them more of what they needed, right? Shooting. Dwayne Ellington was, he's seen better days. But last season for Detroit, he was definitely a valuable player. I thought, Detroit should have definitely looked into, retaining Wayne Ellington. But this is a great pickup for LA. I could see him starting even from day one. You could convince me of him starting. You could convince me of Talen Horton-Tucker starting. You could convince me of Kendrick Nunn starting. Or you could convince me of Malik Monk starting. Another guy similar to Wayne Ellington. Who they're both just going to come in and be asked to space the floor for this team. And then as well as Kent Bazemore. Not the biggest Kent Bazemore fan. I mean, I understand the signing. I think he looked a lot better than he was last year in Golden State. I think he got a lot of leeway to play through his mistakes. Not really all that good of a shooter. So I expect, Kent Bazemore to get some minutes in the beginning of the season, and then he's going to play pretty bad, and then he's probably going to get relegated to, a bench, maybe a reserve minutes. If somebody gets hurt, then Kent Bazemore comes in just because, of his inability to shoot. But taking a look at LA's free agency, they had minimum assets to go out there and add floor spacing around LeBron, AD, and Russ, and which they needed desperately in order to be taken as a serious level contender. And they went out there, you added a 40% shooters and 40% 3-point shooters, and Wayne Ellington, Carmelo Anthony, and Malik Monk, a serviceable point guard, and Kendrick Nunn who could create his own shot. You re-sign your young player in Taylor Horton Tucker at a pretty good contract in terms of being able to trade him. At that 10 million, for 3 years. Trevor Ariza, you can see what he still has left in the tank. You took a flyer on Kent Bazemore, and then Dwight Howard, you add backup big man depth. All these guys are minimum contract players for a reason, but still, LA needed shooting, and they went out there and they got some of the best shooters on the market, and now they could really go 5 out in certain lineups. You could have Russell Westbrook on the floor with Melo, with Wayne Ellington, with Malik Monk, maybe even Trevor Ariza. You could go 5 out with Russ. You could put 3 shooters finally around LeBron and AD. You could have just LeBron on the floor and put 4 other shooters around him. So LA has a lot of different pieces to pick and choose what they want to do. But again, I really like LA's free agency. They needed shooting, and they went out there and got it. And they got some of the best shooters on the market. So I think that their free agency haul warrants nothing less than an A. Moving on to the B tier, first up we have the Golden State Warriors, who walked away from free agency with Andre Iguodala, Otto Porter Jr., and Nemanja Bjelica. At this point in his career, Andre Iguodala probably isn't offering as much on-court production as he used to. These are the twilight years of his career. But really, with that signing, it's all about the leadership in the locker room, and as well as the mentorship for the young guys, which is going to be very valuable considering how raw guys like Jonathan Kuminga and James Wiseman are, at this point in their careers. So I really like the Andre Iguodala signing, and if he's able to play, on the court, it's a great plus. But if he's not, you're not really expecting to. It's really just for the leadership, in the locker room and the mentorship for the young guys, which I really like. Moving on to the Otto Porter Jr. signing, I'm a pretty big fan of the signing, but I am a bit cautious just because of Otto Porter Jr.'s injury concerns. I'm not expecting him to stay healthy. He's never really been able to stay healthy, so I'm not expecting him to do so this year. And I think he's going to start at the 3 while Kuminga kind of eases his way into the NBA. And I think at the end of the season, I would definitely bet that either Porter Jr. is hurt and Kuminga starting, or Otto Porter Jr. is just being outperformed by Kuminga. So I think definitely by season's end, Kuminga will be the starter and not Otto Porter Jr. But again, a solid signing if he is able to stay healthy as a 3-and-D role player at this point in his career at that forward spot. And then finally, we have Nemanja Bjelica, and I really like this signing. As a backup big who can space the floor, could potentially even start for Golden State. I think it's certain matchups, depending on who they're playing and whether they want more floor spacing on the court. And Golden State has never really had that many big men who can space the floor. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how Nemanja Bjelica is used by Steve Kerr, in this offense, which I think should be really exciting for Golden State Warriors fans. He's going to open up the floor again at that forward spot, which is very valuable and something that they haven't really had that much of. For guys like Kuminga and Curry and James Wiseman. So I'm very high on that signing. So again, I think Golden State had a solid free agency. They knock it out the ballpark like LA, no, but on Iguodala with his leadership, Porter Jr., a solid 3-and-D role player, and then Nemanja Bjelica, a floor spacing big. Solid free agency for Golden State. Definitely got better. Can't complain there. Moving on to the Phoenix Suns, they walked away from free agency with a haul of Chris Paul, Cam Payne, JaVale McGee, Abdul Nader, and Frank Kaminsky. We could start off with the Chris Paul signing, which I thought was an awesome signing. They locked up Chris Paul long term, and I believe it's 4 years, $120 million, and only about half of that is guaranteed. So that it's really kind of like a football contract if you think about it. And it's a great signing. It's a great signing. You lock up your point guard that led you, to your first final since the 90s, since the Charles Barkley era. You sign him up long term, and given his injury concerns and his age, the contract is half guaranteed. So if worse comes to worse, you can cut your ties with him and not be left in such a financial hole. So great contract for Phoenix, 10 out of 10, knocked it out the ballpark with the Chris Paul signing. The campaign signing as well. He's only getting paid, I believe 18 mil for 3 years. He's getting paid $6 mil for 3 years. That's one of the best sixth men in the NBA. That's a great signing. I'm not sure what his market was like. I definitely thought he could have gotten more for other teams. I thought he was going to get more for other teams. But, the fact that Phoenix was able to retain him at such a cheap cost, definitely makes that a plus contract. JaVale McGee bringing in, a backup big who is going to add, a locker room presence, for this team, concerning the fact that they don't really have another backup big, and it was probably one of their main weaknesses in the playoffs. I think was a great signing for Phoenix. Is on top of, being a backup big, JaVale McGee also was a great locker room presence, so I think that's great for this team. Abdul Nader, not expecting him to play much, and as well as Frank Kaminsky at this point in his career is not going to play much. But, I'm a big fan of that JaVale McGee signing. And then the Campaign and Chris Paul signings, with Campaign, how cheap that contract is, and Chris Paul with only half of that being guaranteed, you have to love what Phoenix did. But again, I think they do have some smaller holes. I think they do have a little bit of a hole at the shooting guard position. Off the bench, I think they could have, maybe added a little bit more depth there for me to really give them, an A grade. But I think they definitely had a very, very good free agency, which warrants, a B grade for me. Moving on to the Utah Jazz, who walked away from free agency with Mike Conley, Rudy Gay, and Hassan Whiteside. Mike Conley, another similar to the Phoenix Suns. They locked up their franchise point guard. Mike Conley is, in my opinion, the most underrated player in the NBA, along with his teammate Rudy Gobert. But Mike Conley was one of the 30 best players in the NBA last year. Was arguably as valuable to Utah offensively as Donovan Mitchell was. It's a hot take, but when you adjust for pace, his efficiency, his role as that floor general for this team. I mean, we all saw the impact of Utah when he went out and how they completely collapsed against the Clippers. So Mike Conley's value to this team is immeasurable, irreplaceable, and they had to lock him up, which they did for 3 years, which they should get the prime of Mike Conley's career. The remaining prime years of his career that he does have left. And for 3 years, a $68 million contract, not that bad for a top 30 player in this league. And then to lock up Rudy Gay as well, they had a big hole at that forward spot. But it was Rudy. I like the idea of Rudy Gay on this team, but, they needed more defense at that spot. A reason why I gave them a lower grade in the draft is because, they drafted a point guard when they need forward perimeter defense, forward defense in general. Rudy Gay is a solid offensive forward, but, defensively, he's not going to be bringing you that much. So I do like the signing in theory of adding another body at that position. But again, he's not much of a defender at that position. So how much value is he really bringing? And, he does like to have the ball in his hands and get his own. Which, again, on this team with Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell and, Joe Ingles and Bojan Bogdanovic, there's a lot of mouths to feed. So I'm not the biggest fan of the Rudy Gay signing. Could it work out? Yes. But am I that big on it? No. And then the Hassan Whiteside signing, a backup big, Hassan Whiteside is one of the more players I'm disappointed in. But, he's a solid backup big. I'm not expecting to see the floor much. They do need a backup big since, Derek Favors did fall off the face of the earth. But Hassan Whiteside should be, give them spot minutes at the center position when they do need it. So Utah, locking up Mike Conley was a great signing. But then the Rudy Gay signing, not all that big on it, just because they needed more perimeter defense, more defense at that forward spot, which they did not obtain. And then Hassan Whiteside is Hassan Whiteside. So I think a solid free agency. I think it warrants a B just because the Mike Conley lockup and Rudy Gay does have the potential to work out for his team. I could see it working out, but again, I'm not sure just because of how inconsistent of a defender he is, and then Hassan Whiteside is Hassan Whiteside. So very solid free agency for Utah, but I don't think the best. So I think they're right here in this B tier. Moving on to the Los Angeles Clippers is the final team that I have in the B tier, and they walked away from free agency with a haul of Kawhi Leonard, Reggie Jackson, Justice Winslow, and Nicholas Batum. Awesome free agency for the Clippers. You lock up your franchise player in Kawhi Leonard, who's going to be out probably all of next year. But again, you lock him up long term, which is great for them. Moving on to Reggie Jackson, you signed, who was really your second best. When Kawhi went out, he was your second best perimeter player. And to lock him up for I believe 2 years, $11 million. It's a great contract for Reggie Jackson. I thought, again, similar to Campaign, I thought his market would have been a lot bigger than it was. But to get him at that contract, that's great value, great signing for the LA. and then get Justice Winslow. I think it's a very, very interesting piece, for this Clippers team. Again, if he can stay healthy, which has been the message of his career, he could be, add another defender for this team, who can guard multiple positions, and as well as be, a playmaker. They've been searching for a playmaker, a true, floor general for this team. They drafted Jason Preston. And Justice Winslow could act as that. When he was at his best in his career, he was acting as that point forward in Miami. So I could definitely see them tap into some of that in it for on this Clippers team, which is going to be very interesting to see. And you took a flyer on him for 2 years, so if I'm excited to see Justice Winslow on this Clippers team. And then their last signing, locking up Nick Batum, was one of their more valuable role players for them last year, was a starter for them, played small ball center minutes for them, played forward minutes for them, played small forward minutes for them, solid defender and floor spacer for the Clippers. So, they retained all their other valuable guys, added a piece like Justice Winslow to see what he can bring them moving forward. Or if he can hit for them, he could bring something very valuable, in terms of being, a pseudo point forward, and as well as being able to guard multiple positions defensively. You lock in Reggie Jackson on a cheap contract, and you lock in one of the 5 best players in the NBA long term. So Clippers had a great free agency, and I think that warrants them being in this B tier. Moving on to the C tier, we have the Denver Nuggets, who walked away from free agency with Will Barton, JaMychal Green, Jeff Green, and Austin Rivers. Will Barton, JaMychal Green, both 2 valuable players for Denver. Will Barton being their 6th man, one of the most valuable perimeter players, and JaMychal Green being their de facto, stretch 4, as well as being one of the more versatile defensive pieces, on this roster. Both valuable players for them last year. And, obviously Denver had to bring them back, as well as Austin Rivers, who had a great run for this team, as a spark plug scorer when Jamal Murray went out. So, they had to bring back all 3 players, as they hope for Jamal Murray to be, more healthy next year, come back right around, the second half of the season, so that they can make a run, in the playoffs. And, the Jeff Green signing, I think, is a very interesting one. I think he's one of the more valuable bench pieces in the league. It seems like Paul Millsap isn't going to be coming back, so he seems to be their Paul Millsap replacement, which, he is. I think he can fill that role very well, not the playmaker that Paul Millsap is, but I think he is a better, offensive player, in terms of, being like a shooter at this point in his career, as well as, you can make an argument that, he when Jeff Green is on defensively, he's more valuable than Paul Millsap, again, at this point in their careers. So, Denver's C tier, they stay pretty much the same and replace Jeff Green with Paul Millsap, not that much of an upgrade. So, they didn't get much better. They didn't get much worse. So, in the C tier, they are. And the same thing with the Sacramento Kings. They walked away with Rashawn Holmes, Terrence Davis, Maurice Harkless, and Alex Len. Added Alex Len to have some bench depth, Harkless to add some forward depth. I don't see those guys getting much rotation minutes. They retained Terrence Davis. They traded for him, a year ago from Toronto, being a 3-and-D role player for them. And as well as, signing Rashawn Holmes, they use their starting center, a very valuable center in today's NBA, pretty versatile center in terms of having, a consistent floater, being an efficient role man. Not the best defender in the world, but I do think he is a little overrated on that side of the floor. But again, they brought back both of these teams, they just brought back all their guys, didn't add much. So didn't get better, didn't get worse. And that's what I have the C tier as. So both of these teams belong in the C tier. Not much to talk about there. Moving on to the D tier, we have the Dallas Mavericks, who walked away from free agency with Tim Hardaway Jr., Reggie Bullock, Sterling Brown, Boban Marjanovic, and Nate Hinton. Nate Hinton's not going to play all that much, so we shouldn't even talk about him. Boban's probably not going to see that floor all that much for Dallas, even though he is a fan favorite. Sterling Brown, I am a pretty big Sterling Brown fan, but I do fear how much he is going to see the floor, on this Dallas team, considering how many 3-and-D role players they already have, on this team. And, they signed Reggie Bullock from my Knicks, who was a beloved player for us. Really loved Reggie Bullock. I wish he could have stayed with us, but, for Dallas, he's going to bring in some solid shooting and good, solid defense. He's a solid 2-way wing. In this league, I think they did overpay him just a little bit, but again, Reggie Bullock is a solid player for Dallas, and then they re-signed Tim Hardaway Jr. to the same deal he was previously on, a 4-year, $72 million contract. While this isn't a bad haul for Dallas, I don't think that they addressed any of their needs that they had, right? They needed another perimeter scorer, and, Tim Hardaway Jr. signing him to that contract, it's just, I think he could have got better value. Reggie Bullock, again, is not going to be able to create his own shots. Sterling Brown is probably not going to see the floor all that much. So, I mean, their only notable move here is really signing Tim Hardaway Jr. And as good of a player as Tim Hardaway Jr. is, I don't expect him, again, to be, that second perimeter option next to Luka, which this team so desperately needs. I threw out the idea in my Colin Sexton trade package video. They could potentially put together a solid package for Colin Sexton. I think at this point they should look to move towards that, because this team, the clock's ticking with Luka. With all these rumors about him being unhappy, the clock is definitely ticking now, and especially now that it's public. The clock is ticking, and they just didn't add any other perimeter scorers on this team. So I expect this to again be probably a fifth, fourth, anywhere from fourth to sixth seed in the Western Conference. I could see them in the play-in tournament as well. But just they need a perimeter score. They needed a legitimate second option perimeter score, and they just didn't go do that. And with the clock ticking on Luka's tenure in Dallas, they didn't improve on that in terms of the draft. Which they didn't have any assets in the draft, but they could have done something in free agency, which they didn't. They just re-signed Tim Hardaway Jr. to the same contract he was previously on, and Tim Hardaway Jr. is not going to be that guy for Dallas. So I am concerned with them moving forward, and even though they didn't have a bad free agency, they didn't address their glaring need, which is the reason why I gave them a D grade. Moving on to the Houston Rockets, who just walked away from free agency with Daniel Tice and David Nwaba. I like the David Nwaba signing, but I really don't like the Daniel Tice signing. Signing him to 4 years, $36 million contract. It really clears up. It really clogs up that big man spot for guys like Alperen Sengun, who I really like. I value as the fifth best player in this previous draft class. He's not going to be able to get as much playing time as he deserves. Just because Daniel Tice is on this roster. I think he's a solid player, but again, Houston's not going anywhere, right? So this signing doesn't really make any sense. Daniel Tice, they'll probably ship him at the deadline, but again, at that contract, I could see some teams being, a little bit weary of that, and making $9 million for a backup big man. Even though he is a solid backup big man, he still is a backup big man. So I really don't like this Daniel Tice signing at all, especially considering how good of a player Alperen Sengun is and how much potential he does have. If anybody watched, the Houston Rockets versus Cavs game in the summer league, he really showed out. He showed out big time. He's not going to be able to get that opportunity most likely his rookie year. Just because of this Daniel Tice signing. So that is the reason why I gave the Houston Rockets a D grade. Moving on to the Memphis Grizzlies, who walked away with Tim Frazier and Killian Tilly. Again, this is a team that didn't do anything, and I think they're just free-falling at this point. They're free-falling, with the Steven Adams, Eric Bledsoe trade, selecting Zaire Williams, just F value everywhere on the board for every move that the Grizzlies have made this offseason. But Tim Frazier is not going to play all that much. I know he was a fan favorite in New Orleans a couple years ago, but Tim Frazier is not going to get any minutes for this Memphis team. And then Killian Tilly is a solid player for this team, and they just brought him back, so they effectively didn't do anything. And again, this is a team that I don't understand what Memphis is doing. Like, I get it, you're tanking. They probably feel like this isn't their time to be competing, but they were just taking so many positive steps, just adding all this depth. Jaren Jackson coming back, Ja continuing to develop in his young career. And, they just handicapped the franchise. They traded their best player last year in Jonas Valanciunas for bad contracts, players that are not going to be positive impact for this team. They continue that trend in free agency by, just signing a backup point guard that's not going to do anything for them, and Killian Tilly, who is a solid player, but, it's nothing crazy. So Memphis definitely belongs in the D tier. Next up, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves, who walked away from free agency with Nathan Knight, Ed Davis, Jared Vanderbilt, and Jordan McLaughlin. Again, Minnesota had they didn't have that much money to work with in free agency, so I can't hate on them too much. But again, Nathan Knight, Ed Davis, not NBA caliber players at this point Ed Davis at this point in his career. Nathan Knight just is not an NBA caliber player. Jared Vanderbilt is solid four, who I think could have great synergy with Karl Anthony Towns, taken into consideration if his jump shot develops. But again, is a backup point guard, backup forward, really, who they retained, and then Jordan McLaughlin, a solid backup point guard that they retained. And Minnesota, they need to start taking to contending seriously, and again, they just were not aggressive at all in this year's free agency. And they had to address their defensive issues, and they just didn't. Maybe Jared Vanderbilt could take that next step in his career. Maybe Jarrett Culver can turn his NBA career around, which is very unlikely. But again, these are all they didn't address their defensive needs. They just brought everybody back, and Nathan Knight and Ed Davis are not going to see the floor, so they don't even really count as roster spots, really. So Minnesota was a team that they need to start taking contending seriously, or else they're risking losing Karl Anthony Towns with him asking out. And they just didn't address any of their needs defensively, so that's why I have them in the D tier. Finally, we have the F tier, and the first team I have in this tier is the New Orleans Pelicans, who walked away from free agency with Devontae Graham, Didi Louzada, Willie Hernan-Gomez, and Garrett Temple. Similar to Dallas, they have a generational talent in Zion Williamson, who is, rumors of him being unhappy are there. Seems like he wants out, and New Orleans did nothing in this free agency to satisfy his desire to leave or make him more happy. Devontae Graham, solid point guard, signed and basically swapped him with Lonzo Ball, which, I don't really understand the point. Lonzo Ball is a much better defender. Devontae Graham is a six man, and, you swapped out a very solid starting point guard for him. I understand Lonzo Ball isn't the best, free throw shooter. He does have his issues, in terms of being, a ball handler in the half court, but still, I think he is a better player than Devontae Graham. As good of an offensive player as Devontae Graham is, he's really just a 3-point shooter, doesn't create inside the paint, and is a complete defensive liability. So all he is really a 3-point shot creator, and that is variable, but that's all he does. And he's a liability defensively, and he can't score anywhere outside of the 3-point, behind the 3-point arc. So it just doesn't make sense, especially when you take into account that Brandon Ingram and Zion both have their issues defensively, and you just swapped out a very good defensive point guard for a liability. New Orleans effectively got worse with that move. Louzada not gonna get all that much playing. Probably will be in the rotation, but I don't see him being a high impact player. Willie Hernan-Gomez, solid backup big, we're going to be behind Jonas Valanciunas, but it's still, just a backup big, and Garrett Temple is a backup 3-and-D wing. So they belong in the F tier. They effectively got worse with the Devontae Graham move, and then they did nothing else in free agency to, bolster their defensive issues, and they effectively got much worse on that end, which they were already a bad defensive team, and now they swapped out, a very good defensive point guard for a liability in Devontae Graham. So that is why New Orleans is in F tier, because of how much worse they got defensively, and they did nothing to address those issues. Moving on to the Oklahoma City Thunder, who just walked away from free agency with Mike Muscala. I thought they could have been a little bit more aggressive in this year's free agency. When you consider how much cap space they did have, only walking with Mike Muscala, I think they could have thrown an offer at Lauri Markkanen. I thought that fit would have been kind of enticing moving forward, even though they do already have, a player similar to him, and, Alexei Pokusevsky in terms of, like the hybrid unicorn four. I think Lauri definitely could have still been an intriguing fit on this team, maybe as, a stretch five. But again, they were just super passive in this year's free agency, and I'm kind of confused as to OKC moving forward. But I mean, I do understand they have like the youth move, but it's just out of these pieces are kind of just mangled, and I guess we'll see how they all fit next year. But another reason why I definitely have them in the F tier is because the whole Kemba Walker deal. Even though I am a Knicks fan and I'm very happy that they did let him go. Obviously for my team's sake, not getting more for him. In terms of you could have potential trade sign. You just let Kemba Walker go for nothing, which I don't understand why they did that, even though he is making the amount of money that he was, and that probably did scare away a lot of teams. I thought there definitely could have been potential suitors for Kemba Walker. So that is the reason why I have the Oklahoma City Thunder in the F tier. Moving on to the Portland Trailblazers, who walked away from free agency with Norman Powell, Ben McLemore, Cody Zeller, and Tony Snell. Tony Snell, backup guard, didn't really see the floor for Atlanta last year. Cody Zeller was the starting center for the Hornets last year. I think it's a decent signing. I think he could, get some minutes for Portland, even though they are expecting, Yusuf Nurkic to take that next step in his development. I do, Ben McLemore is a backup shooter for them, even though they do already have a lot of shooting. You can never have more shooting, I guess. And then they re-signed Norman Powell. And the problem that I have with the Portland Trailblazers is that, Dame, obviously, it seems like his departure is inevitable. And, the Norman Powell move, I really don't understand it. You traded away Gary Trent Jr., who was just a younger, I think, better version of Norman Powell, much better defensively than Norman Powell. and you to re-sign Powell at the same contract. So I don't understand, what was going on there. Ben McLemore, obviously not a defender. Cody Zeller, solid backup big man for them. And then Tony Snell, probably not going to be in the rotation. So they did nothing to address their defensive woes and are essentially just bringing back the same team as last year. And they're just anticipating them. They're just setting themselves up for disappointment yet again. And the Norman Powell move makes no sense to me. Ben McLemore, Cody Zeller, Tony Snell, So Portland belongs in the F tier for me. And then the final team that we have is the San Antonio Spurs, who walked away with Doug McDermott, Zach Collins, and Jock Landale. Jock Landale probably not going to probably see the floor all that much. Zach Collins was a solid signing, 3 years, $22 million. He's going to be making $7 million for 3 years. Decent signing, but he's not going to stay. He's not going to stay healthy. I think his NBA career is pretty much done at this point. But if he can't stay healthy in a perfect world, in the perfect world where he can stay healthy and continue to develop, even though he hasn't seen the floor in a year and a half, 2 years, and return to what he used to be, being a versatile defensive forward who can space the floor as well. That would be a valuable piece for San Antonio. But again, that's in a perfect world. Zach Collins is probably done with his NBA career at this point. In his career. And the Doug McDermott contract was just awful. Paying Doug McDermott, $42 million for 3 years just doesn't make any sense. Just doesn't make any sense. You already signed, you drafted Josh Primo, a sharpshooter, way too high with the 12th pick in the draft, and you go ahead and sign another sharpshooter. I just don't understand what San Antonio is doing. Everybody's like, oh, they know something we don't know. I think San Antonio is just done, and all their moves this offseason, hint to that. They've rolling over, given up. I expect Pop to retire pretty soon. Doug McDermott, you're paying a sharpshooter bench player $42 million for 3 years. Nobody's going to trade for that contract. Zach Collins probably is going to stay healthy, and Jock Landale is not going to see the floor. So that is the reason why I had the San Antonio Spurs in the F tier. And that's in the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please subscribe if you haven't already and share it with a friend. My goal is to hit 100 subscribers by the end of September. I want to continue to grow this channel, grow our community. So hope you guys can help me in reaching that goal. Please share with a friend if you guys think they would enjoy my content. But without any further ado, that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching again, and have a blessed day. Take care. Peace.